of our leaders, teachers, facilitators for an on-campus small group on Sunday mornings, hey, this is the place for you. What we're going to do is going to kind of walk through this week's lesson and give you some things that hopefully will help you as you prepare to get ready to teach, facilitate, lead your on-campus small group on Sunday, January the 25th. Now, this continues on in the overall ministry emphasis that we've been doing for January and going into February. I talk about life on mission, and I don't know about you, but this has been such an exciting study to be a part of it, and just seeing what God's doing and kind of how He's birthing in our hearts some things about what it means to be on mission and how we can be on mission, not only as a church, but as individuals. And so it's just been so great. And like this past Sunday, tremendous message from Pastor Brett, challenging us, encouraging us, and being life on mission as individuals, but as a church, and just seeing how God has been working through us and in us over the last 4 years to help us get into a better position to be on mission as a church and do missional and missionary work than we've done in the past. And just remember, Sunday was not so much about dollars as it was about how God has worked to position us to be in a better place to carry out the ministry, the calling that He has on us, to carry out the mission that He's given to every one of us. So, hey, you might even want to spend a little bit of time this Sunday kind of rethinking that or remembering some of those things from this past week, because that was such I thought such a powerful way for us to visualize and see and understand how God is at work and what that was all about. It's not paying off debt, though that's a good thing in and of itself, but it was about us being in a better position to carry out the mission that God has given us. Okay, I get off of that. Now let's go into this week's message, all right? Because we're continuing to talk about what it means to be life on mission. And in your lesson overview, go ahead. If you haven't done this already, you should have received a transcript emailed to you. Print it out, get it there where we can kind of walk through it together. And on that, page 1's the lesson overview. And it kind of just gives you the big bird's eye view of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be looking at 2 different passages, one from Luke 15 and then one from 1 Thessalonians 2. And in these 2 passages, we're going to be focusing primarily on how we get ourselves as individuals in a position to present the gospel, share the gospel with others. As we say here at Dayspring, it gives us what we want to be able to give every man, woman, and child repeated opportunities to hear and see the gospel. Now think about this. If we're going to give every man, woman, and child that opportunity, then that means we as individuals are going to have to be connecting with every man, woman, and child. Some of us are going to connect with others better than we do with someone else. That's why all of us involved in that, we have the opportunity to connect with every man, woman, and child in different ways, from different backgrounds, different perspectives, and help them understand the gospel. So that's what we're going to be looking at this week. Now, page 2 and 3 is your introduction. In the introduction, and by the way, let me remind you, little gray shaded areas, always teaching tips. I just encourage you to take a moment to read through those, because they give you some good info, some things you can use and maybe not use in your particular on-campus small group. As I've said before, and that you know your group better than anybody. So as a leader, facilitator, teacher, use what works, what doesn't work for yours. May need to mold it, reshape it, reframe it whatever way, and use it, or you may not use it at all. That's your call. We're just giving it there for you to help. So look through the shaded area there on page 2 and got some good things there, I think. The teaching tip there, the first part where it talks about how to start off your small group, by highlighting, discussing some of what you've read this week from the Life on Mission book. That's a good way to help pull in what you've been learning there, as well as encouraging people to actually be reading the book. And by the way, we should have more books available Sunday. If some of your class members haven't been able to pick those up yet, our small group members, they can get them Sunday. We'll have them available. They should be here there. They just didn't arrive in time for this past Sunday. Now, in that, you're going to look through the introduction. It's going to kind of focus in on how oftentimes we have, as in our church life, we tend to focus in on training in a specific type of way to present the gospel. In other words, it's become more of a program thing that we do than a personal interaction with someone. And so we're going to kind of wrestle with that a little bit. It's not that those programs are bad necessarily, but I think we're going to discover the personal interaction may become more important than us having participated or memorized or gone through some specific program. So we'll kind of interact with that a little bit as we go through there. Now, what we're in the introduction is kind of focusing in on too has to do with, there are basically 2 types of evangelism. that we see presented both in the Bible and in our present day context. One is mass evangelism, where you gather a big crowd together and usually one or two individuals are highlighted that share testimony or preach or communicate the gospel in that way. The other is a personal evangelism, where on an individual level, we are able to interact with someone, and in the course of that conversation, the course of maybe living life with them, we have the opportunity to communicate with them the gospel. And not only the gospel in its biblical sense, but the gospel and how it has been embraced by us and it's worked its way out in our life. And we're going to look at some things in regards to that this week that are probably going to challenge, that we were going to be challenged to focus, realize that the importance of a personal conversation may be even more important than the mass gathering together of a lot of people. And so we're going to kind of help us challenge to rethink some of that. Both of them can be very effective, but I think we'll look in our own culture today and realize that personal interaction may be more effective than the large group setting. Some stuff in your introduction can help you on that gray shaded area there on page 2. There at the very bottom of that last paragraph, I think that's an important quote for you to look at and mull over in your own heart and mind, as well as you get ready to kind of communicate this with your group. Page 3 continues that introduction, and it talks about some of the aspects of how this mass versus personal interaction evangelism has worked in the days gone by, even in the biblical context. And then challenges us to think through that in our present day context. Don't miss the two things there on page 3. Kind of about the last few paragraphs. There's a quote from James Emery White that I think would be good for you to even think about using this analogy and introducing this with your class. It said it's rare for people to become engaged, much less married, on their first date. I'm sure that didn't happen with any of us. Maybe so, but it's very rare if it ever happens at all. But accepting Christ is no different. In other words, what he's saying there, it's going to, just as getting married or finding that mate for life, it takes more than just that one first-time date. You're going to have to invest in each other and get to know one another to realize, come to a place, I want to spend the rest of my life with this person. Sometimes it's the same type of thing that happens in our regards to us sharing Christ with people. We've got to invest in them and earn the right, so to speak, to share with them the gospel so that they can come to know the God who loves them and cares about them. That bold print there on the bottom of page 3, make sure you look at that, because it's talking about the sense of investment in a relationship, which is going to move us in to teaching the text. Page 4 moves into that. I told you there are two passages we're going to look at. One from Luke 15, I said Luke 15 earlier. Luke 10, verses 25 through 37. A story that we're all very familiar with is the story of the Good Samaritan. And here's our major teaching point for that story. The greater the investment, the greater the return will be. And Aaron Coe touched on this when he was here with us, so it may sound a little bit familiar to you, but I think there's some things we can gain from it. Again, this is one of those passages that we have to be very careful about, that we just don't assume we know everything right off the bat, because we've heard it, it's familiar to us. Make sure you take some time as a leader, as a teacher, to look through this, think it through, let the Spirit of God speak to you about it as you get ready to do the same with your class, and that they don't, those small group members don't fall into that same trap as well. Now, there's a couple of things I just want to point out in here. This the story of the Good Samaritan. That story is told in response to a very specific question. It's very important to look at that question and to see the attitude of the person asking that question. As in Luke chapter 10, it says he wanted to, the person asking this question about wanted to know, when he asked this question about who is my neighbor, it says in verse 29 of Luke chapter 10 that he wanted to justify himself. In other words, he wanted to make himself look good. He wanted to make what he was already doing look good to Jesus, to look good to God. And Jesus challenged him on that with the telling of this story. And a couple of things to pick up on this story. The first two people that passed, the Levite and the priest, that kind of passed by this guy that had gotten beaten up and robbed and kind of left for dead, they saw him in a totally different light than the Good Samaritan did. They saw that person or that individual, they saw him as maybe a problem that they needed to avoid. They didn't want to have anything to do with him. They saw him as a pest, somebody that was going to inconvenience them, cause, disrupt their schedule, disrupt what they were doing. The Samaritan saw that individual as a person who was in need. It's oftentimes how we see people around us is going to determine how we respond to them there. And he's seeing them as a person in need, then took the time to invest in their life. I would suggest to you too, he didn't just see that individual as a person in need. He saw them as a person who God loved, who God created, who Jesus died for. And the result was he was willing to invest in their life. Something for us to think about as well. By the way, your teaching tips there in the gray shaded area, again, make sure you pay attention to that. See if there's some things you can use on that. There's a question there at the bottom of page 4. It says, based on Jesus' final question back to the lawyer, what was the main point he was making to the man? And obviously the question was, which of these three do you think was the neighbor? And of course the man said, the one who showed him mercy. And the point Jesus was making was that the one who fulfilled the greatest commandment was a man who was willing to invest himself in someone else. And it cost him something. And that's what happens. If we're going to invest in the lives of other people, it's going to cost us. We're going to have to reach out to others and to share with them what we have and what they need. And so there's some information on page 5 that kind of helps you think through that. Midway through there is another question that's asked. Look back at the parable of the Good Samaritan. What all did his act of kindness cost him? And that's an important thing to look at. Because, the reality is any investment we make, whether it's a financial investment or a relational investment, is going to cost us something. And, if you're making a financial investment, it's going to cost you some dollars to buy the stock and so forth. By the way, there's a risk involved that you could lose it. Same thing relationally. It's going to cost you. It's going to cost you some time. It's going to cost you some energy. It's going to cost you maybe some dollars. Think about this Good Samaritan. You know what it cost him? It cost him some social stigmas. Interesting. The Jews and the Samaritans had a very antagonistic type of relationship, and they didn't like each other. Put it in simple terms, and it was this Samaritan who reached past that to touch the life of a man that everybody else from where the Samaritan's from said, hey, let him go. They said basically he's getting what he deserves. But the Samaritan saw him as a person who God loved and created, and a person who needed his help, and so he reached out to him. And I would think, in this too, that Samaritan had to deal with some probably pushback from his fellow Samaritans that he would reach out and help this guy. We put him up as a hero, and rightly so, but his fellow Samaritans may have not thought of him as that way. Just something to think about in regards to the relationships that God may bring across our path. The second major point that we're going to be looking at comes out of 1 Thessalonians 2. And that point is this: relationship evangelism is a long, ongoing process. One of the things that the story of the Good Samaritan teaches us is that if we're going to be able to invest in someone's life, if we're going to be able to share with them, then we're going to have to be willing to reach out to them and to begin a relationship with them. And that's what the Samaritan did. He reached out, across the social stigmas, racial stigmas, religious stigma. He reached out past what it was going to cost him personally to invest in that person's life. And the thing about it is that investment, oftentimes, if not every time, it's not just a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 9 helps us there, because we read where Paul is writing back to this church, these people that he loved, that he spent time with, And in that, he reveals some of the things that he did with them while he was there. He talked about that he shared the gospel with them, the gospel he'd been entrusted with, and that he spent time with them. He developed relationships, friendships. In fact, it says there that he had given them his own life, his very own life. It's just not that he came and preached and left town. He stayed there and shared life with them, and became part of life with them. And it also says, and as your teaching the text points out at the bottom of page 5, he spent time there as labor and toil for the sake of not causing a burden to those folks. You know what Paul was saying? He says, you know what? It cost me to be there with you. It cost me. And I was willing to do that because I was willing to invest in your life, have a relationship with him. That's relationship evangelism. And this also helps us understand this point I kind of made. I think I alluded to a little bit earlier. Where every man, woman, and child, every one of us, if we're going to reach every man, woman, and child, then all of us need to be involved in this, because some of us are going to connect with some people that others would not connect with, and vice versa. And this ongoing relationship investment is needed because there are no two people are alike, and no two people are going to connect alike. So we all need to be involved in this, and all need to be willing to let God use us in this way. There's the third paragraph on page 6. James Embry White gives a good argument there that helps us understand how that works and the process that it is, because evangelism most of the time is not going to be a one-time presentation, but it's going to be an ongoing process that evolves out of a relationship. About 2/3 of the way down, there are 2 questions to ask there. I'd call your attention to those. Those are some good challenge questions to think through. Again, with these questions, what I would suggest you do is already have thought these through, have some answers to throw out there, get people's feedback on there. And then the very, very bottom of page 6 is kind of wrapping up some of this teaching, the text there, and talking about quotes of Bible scholar Alvin Reed, which, raises an important point. Read that quote. And here's the point. If we're going to be able to build relationships with lost people, we're going to have to expose ourselves to lost people. We're going to have to put ourselves in a place where we can get to know lost people, and they can get to know us. And so for some of us, that may mean we need to think through exactly where we're spending a lot of our time and how we're spending it. And maybe there's some adjustments we need to make in some of the ways we spend some of our discretionary time, so that we can do it in a place where we can actually begin to have opportunities to develop relationships with lost people, and be willing to do that. For me, one of the things I've discovered, as a pastor, I'm around church people a whole lot, and I have to be very intentional about putting myself in a place where I can maybe have interactions with those who don't know Christ. And for me, one of the places that has happened, and you looking at me probably think, you actually do this? I do go to a gym. I work out on a kind of semi-regular basis, and looking at me physically, you'd say, well, that sure is a big surprise, but I do. And one of the things I've discovered is I bump into people at the gym, and conversations get started, and I've had the opportunity to build some relationships with people, and working my way into actually talking to them about God and being able to encourage them. Some of them I've invited to come to Dayspring. Some of them I just talk with. And I try to avoid or let them know our pastor. Sometimes when they find out I'm a pastor, our conversation shifts or they disappear from the conversation. But I'm just wanting people to be able to interact with them. And the point of all that is to say this. If we're going to build relationships with people that don't know God, and we got to put ourselves in a place to interact with those people there. The bottom of page 6 talks about some ways you can start conversations with people about that and how to develop that conversation and work through that conversation to be able to get to the place to share the gospel. By the way, most of the time your conversations are going to not start with the gospel, but hopefully they'll end up with the gospel. Your conversation is going to start about things you share in common, things that you interact with together, things that are that you both enjoy, or something that you have a similar interest in, and those oftentimes can lead to the opportunity to have a conversation, to talk about the gospel there. One of the things too I want to encourage you about, and you encourage your small group members on, is to be able to communicate the gospel, we oftentimes have to earn the right to do that. That's where this relationship investment comes in. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about spending the time, spending the energy, maybe pushing past some of those things that might normally hold us back, to be able to invest in the life of a person so that they can see that we care. I think somebody's kind of said it like this. Oftentimes before, people are more interested to know that we care than they are in hearing what we know. And when they know we care, then they're going to listen to what we know and be able to share that with them there. One last thought here for you in teaching this text. Remember, your responsibility, being a follower of Jesus, having a life on mission, your responsibility is not to convert anyone, but your responsibility is to communicate the gospel in a way that they can understand it. And when we do that, then we leave the results up to the Spirit of God to do only what He can do, which is to convict and convert and change people. Boy, that's freedom, isn't it? Freedom to know that it's not my responsibility to make sure this person comes to faith. It's my responsibility to invest in them a way that I can share the gospel with them and they can understand it. And the Spirit of God does the rest. Hey, by the way, be sure and mark your calendar. For Wednesday night, January the 28th, we're going to have a church-wide training opportunity for all of our adults. Our students are going to do something similar to this in their meeting. But on January 28th, on a Wednesday night, 6 o'clock in the main room, we're going to have an opportunity for you to learn a helpful tool that can help you in your conversations with people, in your conversations of helping others, being able to do just what we said, communicate the gospel in a way that they can understand it. And it's going to come out of relationships that we develop with them. Okay? So be sure and mark that down. Share that with your small group members as well. Page 8, your application moment. Hey, don't pass it by. Be sure and take a few minutes to work through that. Provide some time at the end. Page 10 is the handout, which has those questions for your group to interact with. You'll want to make sure everybody has that in front of them. The question number 2 is one I think that would do us all good to ponder for a little bit. All the questions are great. Question number 2 is especially one I would make sure your group thinks through together in their application moment, whether you do it as a overall group or breaking into the small clusters. And then page 9 is your conclusion, wraps it up with a memory verse for this week. Have a great time studying together, learning together, sharing life together, being life on mission. God bless.